tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we are at fetter number 3 in the list of the 10 fetters, the Sangyojana. The first fetter, and really the foundational opening of the Dharma eye, Sakaya Ditti, or seeing through Sakaya Ditti. All of the fetters are the block or the thing that hinders us. So the insight is the seeing through or cutting through or removal or liberation from this quality. So the first one, personality view, you'll sometimes hear I was just reading around and saw the translation substantialist view, which maybe is nice. It takes it out of the realm of psychology, where if we use the word personality, it can feel like we're talking about the surface level of our psychology. That's just my personality, we might say. But it's more than that, right? It's really the foundational insight into selflessness, that there isn't a substantial, permanent, abiding, essential being here. There's just conditions at play, and the responses unfolding from there, and then more conditions. So the first breakthrough is Sakaya Ditti. The second is what is the second? We talked about last night, or last week, I mean, doubt, of course. I pull up my list. I'm like, what's the order? So doubt is the fifth hindrance. And so this is doubt in myself, doubt in the path. Primarily as a fetter, it's doubt that the path either works or is real or good, or that I can accomplish it. So you can have doubt both, externally, path doesn't work. Externally, teacher isn't good. Internally, even if path and teacher are good, I can't do it. So all of those forms of doubt are a fetter. And particularly this pervasive sense that, I think it really comes down to the pervasive sense that we can't be free, or that we won't be able to be free, no matter what we do. So we've seen through the delusion of the fixated self, and with that seeing through, we also have this faith or confidence arising that the path actually works. So those two are tied together. And the third is tied also to them, which is why these first three are the things that are abandoned with the attainment of stream entries. They all go together. So these first three are a set. And this third one is belief in rites and rituals, or belief that rites and rituals will liberate. The Pali is sila bhatta paramasa, sila bhatta paramasa. And this one often, feels like the one that doesn't get talked about very much in the West. I think it's talked about a lot more in some Asian countries, where there's still as there is here in what we might call the folk tradition, but maybe less so in some of our communities, a very strong belief and reliance on magic, ritual, observance, as a core part of how we move through the world. And so Sila Bhatta Paramasa is seen through with stream entry, along with the fixated self and doubt, because for the same reasons, that we've seen that the path works to liberate the heart from suffering, from fixation, from wrong view. And having seen that the path works, this third fetter is the corollary that other things that are not this path do not work. to liberate the heart and mind. And that doesn't mean that only Buddhism as a path liberates. I think, and this is controversial in the Buddhist world, but I think that there are, you could observe other faiths or other traditions and they could liberate. The Buddha said something can be called the Dhamma if it contains the Eightfold Path. And that doesn't mean that I think it has to contain the Eightfold Path and call it the Eightfold Path, but it has to include all of the elements of the Eightfold Path, right? So if you have something that that has come about through a different set of conditions than the Buddhist stream, and it contains right view about suffering, and it contains right intention and right speech and action and livelihood and effort and mindfulness and concentration, but really all of them, right? Like you're really entering into jhana, or there's the possibility of entering into jhana in meditation. There's really the possibility of observing one's experience with mindfulness. There's, that these elements are there, even if they're called something else, then, that's a path that can liberate. And so, but there are clearly things that are outside of this path that do not liberate. And so this is one of the main ones that the Buddha singles out. This one could be any number of things. Like there's lots of things in the world that don't liberate, right? The Buddha said in his very first teaching that hedonism is not liberatory, right? And that ascetic self-mortification is not liberatory. So these are already dismissed, right? This one is here because it's not just an example of something that we might cling to that doesn't liberate, but it's a very particular kind of action in the human psyche and cultures, very common across cultures, that we might think liberates, partly because in many places it says it does. So rites and rituals here points to a whole range of things, right? It points to symbolic ritual, the kinds of things that we might do at an altar or in a ritual service. So making offerings, making specific prayers to specific deities or natural forces. It includes, symbolic practices like ritual dances and ritual songs and ritual incantations, chanting that's meant to, accomplish a certain goal, propitiate a deity or move energy in a certain way. So all of that kind of ritual. It includes, rituals like coming of age rituals, sacraments, ways that we might, mark the setting of a strong intention or the changing of seasons. We're going to go to a ritual and storytelling for the fall equinox here soon, with our beloved West County animist community here, lovely folks observing the 8 seasonal markings, somewhat from a Celtic and Northern European perspective. And so that's a ritual, right? That's a seasonal ritual that we really value. And so that's one kind of ritual, right? Time-based rituals, life moment kinds of rituals. A birthday party is a ritual. And the other kind of thing that I think this points to is rites and rituals specifically intended to change or manipulate or be a kind of action in the material or relational world. And the word I'm just going to use for this is magic. So things that you do with the intent to affect the world around you, So the kind of magic where you might, gather together potent substances and impress prayers upon them or burn them or offer them in a ritual way, not just as devotion, although that's included in the rites and rituals, but specifically with a kind of, like, may this affect the world, with the offering of this substance, may, you know, may this process that we are about to undertake be successful. You know? And so every culture has practiced this kind of ritual magic in various ways. It's an ancient technology for interfacing with the world. We still do it in ordinary, common, you know, culture, um, often in ways that we have perhaps decided are just symbolic or relics of an earlier time. Like, I'm wearing a wedding ring, and to the extent that I think that means something, we did a magic spell, and that magic is still working upon us, right? And whenever I take it off, um, like to do a karate class and punch the thing, or to, you know, whatever, sometimes I take it off if I'm going to go for a long swim, not because it ever would fall off, because it's tight enough, but because I don't like being afraid that it would fall off. Every time I take it off, I feel I feel a stretching in my heart that I think is the action of that magic that it is, that it means something to take it off, and it means something when I put it back on. And so the meaningfulness of that is magic. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing literally um, efficacious about wearing a particular ring. Like when I trade it out for a different, if I have other rings, I could take this ring off and put on another ring, and I can feel how the other ring is not magical, you know, or maybe it's magical in a different way, right? But it's not my wedding ring. And we do these things, right? There's all sorts of things that we do that are like that. And you may have an altar in your house, and you may make offerings on it, and you know, and the Buddhist tradition is full of rituals. You know, one of the things that we sometimes do at our seasonal ritual in the spring is we tie a piece of string or yarn or cloth around a tree, um, partly in a kind of honor the tree, you know, earth animist sort of way, and partly in an echo of the kind of honor the tree in a Buddhist way that's done in Buddhist cultures, where, you know, some Thai monastics in the modern deforestation era very intentionally ordained trees as monks and tied robes around them, which would make them unable to be cut down. So, so that's a, you know, that's a kind of magic, right? Somebody with a, you know, somebody with a chainsaw could come along and ignore the robe and cut the tree down, but it's strong enough magic in a strong Buddhist country that it actually worked and, and protected the tree, you know. So, so there's lots of kinds of magic. I define magic mostly as these kinds of um, uh, actions that are meant um, to affect the world around us, to affect our relational world or the material world, um, but in this indirect way, right? So, you know, uh, like my partner and I also share a bank account, which ties us together, you know, differently than the wedding ring does, in a very concrete way. And you know, the bank account, it doesn't feel like magic at all. It feels very logistical in a certain way. And, you know, that doesn't mean it's not emotional. Like we might have feelings about sharing the bank account. Like it's not meaningless. But but the way that doing the action of opening the account affects the material world is in a different register than, you know, the symbolic action of exchanging rings, right? So you can have a feel for how we might still be using the word magic here. So rites and rituals uh, includes all of these realms that we would call magic. So the Buddha includes them here in the list of fetters, not because they don't work. And this is really important, because sometimes we can have the sense that this fetter means that if we believe at all in anything that's immaterial, you know, that rituals have any meaning at all, or that magic has any efficaciousness at all, that if we believe that that's true, that's the thing we let go of when we get liberated. In other words, is the Buddha, a blatant materialist, just saying that, all this stuff is just made up? He's totally not. It's a fetter, not because it doesn't work. In a certain way, if it just blatantly didn't work, it wouldn't be much of a fetter because we wouldn't rely on it that much. It's a fetter partly because it does work. It works to do certain things. So rituals and ceremony and offering and devotion and magic, they work. They affect the state of the heart, right? Devotional ritual can really uplift the heart. Relational magic can be very powerful for a relationship, or to break a relationship, or to cut the threads of an unhealthy relationship, or to stitch together, hopefully, a healthy relationship, to put a ring on it, and if you like it. And so these things really work. The thing that they don't, what they work in is that they work in the relative world. They work in the world of relationships, in the world of, material exchange, physical environment, but including the relative world of like our own moods and feelings and states. So they could even work as a support for practice. The ritual of lighting a candle or lighting the incense or clearing your space. Like, these are ritual gestures. They are a kind of magic. They totally help your meditation, right? They are powerful in the sense that they can have a palpable effect, on your life, in your material circumstances, in your psychological circumstances. But all of that is still the realm of the relative. The realm of the relative includes things like healing, right? The Dhamma, the Eightfold Path, we say it's healing because it works very deeply on us in the direction of awakening and well-being. But it's not healing in the sense that it will, like, take away your headache or your cancer or help you live longer or anything like that. Magic might, though, right? An appropriate ritual or offering might actually be healing in those ways. And of course, it's one of the most ancient medicines. Healing, like getting the body more comfortable when it was uncomfortable, resolving a trauma or a physical wound or an emotional wound. Those things all exist in the relative world, and as such, they are good things to do, right? It's easier to practice for liberation when you're healthy, but healthy is not a requirement. People can get liberated, on the sickbed and on death's door. So the thing that rites and rituals and magic cannot do is that they can't liberate. And that's the one thing they can't do. And this is because liberation or awakening, this breakthrough to stream entry and beyond, is not dependent on external conditions. And it can't be. If it was, the whole path would become a material path. If external conditions were necessary to awaken, then the whole foundation of the path would be like, make sure you have a safe enough house to live in, and make sure you're comfortable and well fed. And that would distort the entire system. It's necessary that all of those things, while helpful, are not requirements, because that's not what we're actually awakening from or based on. Awakening is awakening to what's real. And what's real is that sometimes there's enough food and sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's youth and health and comfort, and sometimes there's not. And the very fact that youth and health and comfort are impermanent and unreliable, that's the whole point. That's dukkha, right? And so if first of all, if magic were able to reliably keep us comfortable, it would it would um, it would be denying in a way or if we believed that magic or ritual were able to keep us reliably comfortable, it would be denying the characteristic of dukkha, the first noble truth, because uh, the whole sting of dukkha, the thing we have to wake up to, is that no amount of manipulating our material or relational conditions can give lasting happiness. There is no wealth or marriage or, you know, uh, healthy body situation of any kind that can itself be enough to be consistently satisfied. And so rites and rituals and magic lives in the realm of working with conditions to improve them as best we can, but it can't live it can't cross over the line into being something that actually liberates, right? It can be a condition for practice being somewhat easier, but it can't actually liberate. So the thing that actually liberates is really only clear seeing, right? Vipassana, whatever you call it, in whatever tradition you're in. There's a cutting through to seeing things as they really are, right? That attention that sees with wisdom the nature of arising experience. This kind of attention that's called, you know, the attention or directed mind coming from the root of our being. Yoniso manasikara is the Pali. Yoniso means from the root or from the womb. The same word yoni used for womb. From the womb comes a kind of attention, the action of attention. Manas is mind, kara is action. The the action of the womb arising mind. So seeing clearly, seeing to the heart of things. This is the only thing that liberates. And so you can simplify that down to wisdom. And so ritual can teach us aspects of the path. It can alter our state so that we can be more receptive to insight and investigation, and it can lead to the strengthening of many, many, many good qualities. But by itself, it can't cause insight. So this is why it's this third fetter. So the first three fetters all together, giving rise to the experience known as stream entry, sotapanna, breaking through the delusion and the illusion of the solid permanent self, and seeing the conditioned arising of experience so clearly that doubt in the path vanishes and the belief that anything other than the path could liberate vanishes. And what we're left with is this clear heart of understanding the path, of understanding what the path is. And the path is the stream that's been entered. So in a certain way, stream entry, constitutes, constitutes what, in this tradition, you could translate as like being, born again into the Dhamma, into the path, not reborn. We're aiming for the end of that, but within this lifetime, there's a kind of, and the Buddha describes it like this in the texts. Sometimes he'll even say, there's, there's only these kinds of people, right? There are the people practicing toward stream entry, and then there's the people with stream entry and beyond. Something so radical changes when this stream of Dhamma is is entered. Really, that's the teaching. And maybe I'll say just a tiny bit more about magic as a kind of coda, because part of what has arisen, in some waves over the past maybe 60 years or so, maybe the past 100 years or so, in the European and post-European West, and more into the globalized, industrial and post-industrial world, is a waves of materialistic rejection of all of the immaterial sciences, including the Dhamma, including the contemplative, but particularly the magical. And then waves of reaction to that, where the magical is brought back and revived and, you know, um, uh, turned toward once again. And, um, you know, like within my own lifetime, the last, 50 some years, I can remember, several distinct waves of like, you know, um, like, you know, witches are really scary and bad in like the satanic panic of the late 70s, um, swinging into like witches are super awesome and good, and like the Wicca revival, in the 80s, etc. And, and a kind of, uh, everything that adheres to ritual and magic is kind of like shallow and new agey and not really respectable, somewhere in there. And then a swing back to like, everybody's invoking things and doing magic, and teen witches are everywhere, and there's all this, and these um, magic never really goes away. And because it's a form of power in the world, and no matter how strongly the materialistic world rejects it, uh, it reemerges again and again. Every generation rediscovers it, and given the chance. And there's a very strong materialist, um, not by which I mean like greedy, material acquisitive, but materialist, like material things are all that there is, um, kind of tendency in contemporary Dharma, partly because in the West, Buddhism um, moved very quickly uh, in its um, in its non-immigrant forms into a kind of a middle and upper middle class rationalist postmodern community, where many of the things that were discarded were the ritual and magical aspects that are still present throughout much of global Buddhism, and present in many um, Buddhist communities um, where traditional practices are still maintained, but in very westernized centers, a generation or two into um, you know European and American descended folks being in charge in those centers, very often the rituals are minimized or left out entirely, really, or something that is seemingly more ritual friendly, but actually sneakily rejecting it in the same way, seen only for their aesthetic, seen only as a kind of performance, or a kind of, symbolic, um, per, um, like only on their symbolic surface in a way, but not as actually invoking forces beyond the human. And And we're actually now in a moment where, partly because as a reaction to hyper disembodied, you know, consumer late industrial or post-industrial life, animism is really swinging back in as folks realize that a loss of reverence to the natural world is obviously one of the conditions that's led to the climate catastrophe, and just the loss of well-being for all of us. Uh, that there's a awakening of animist sensibilities throughout the Dharma world, and going along with that, there's a whole wave of folks reacting to, um, and if you've been on retreat with me, I'm part of this, but reacting to the stripping away of ritual and the more than human, that many of our Western teachers did in the first waves of Dharma in the West, making it almost purely psychological, essentially. And lots of folks are reawakening to or going looking for those aspects of the Dhamma that are magical and that are um, supportive of practice, even as we understand that they don't themselves awaken, but that they're actually part of the tradition for a reason, right? Buddhism is not a rationalist, materialist tradition that rejects, uh, you know, the unseen, that rejects the mysterious, that rejects the efficaciousness of certain kinds of ritual and magic. But the Buddha here wants us to just be clear, as we would with any of our actions, what kind of action leads to what kind of result. Right? So in this sense, this is really this third fetter. This is really a teaching about karma, right? About action and its results, and what kinds of conditions lead to the results that we want. Right? When I, uh, you know, when I make an offering to Kuan Yin, and I make it with a prayer that all beings may be, their suffering may be eased. I do this kind of metta suffused into a sort of ritual framework, or a formal ritual like the Great Compassion Mantra and the forgiveness rituals. Um, the part of what we're doing there is a kind of magic, calling on the force of this vast conscious compassion that we call Kuan Yin, to really reach into the material, the very physical, uh, real experience of people on this earth, and bring it to more ease. Not just as an empty prayer. Like, if you really don't think that those rituals do anything at all, you lose interest in them. Actually, you're just like, oh, that's not my kind of practice, right? You will keep going with them because if you're drawn to them, and you don't need to be, but if you are, you'll keep going with them because you actually have this very real intuition that they work. They change your state, and you can feel, and this is mysterious, you can feel how they change the world out there. I've said this story before here about this double-blind study that was done at one point with a whole bunch of terminally ill people in a hospital somewhere in Oregon, I think, Oregon, Washington, Pacific Northwest. And they got the names of all these people who had these terrible diagnoses, and they took these names to a bunch of, I say this not pejoratively, but it's sort of the demographic that they took them to, a bunch of old church ladies in the Bible Belt in the Midwest, who have a practice of praying for people, right? You give them a list of names. We used to do this in my Catholic church as a kid. Hold in your hearts, and they would just read off all the names of all the parishioners that were in trouble. And to one group of women, they gave a list of names. Just pray for these people. You don't know them. Just a bunch of names. To another group of people, they said, just generically pray for people over there to be well, but we're not going to give you names. And then some whole group of people weren't included at all. Some people with the terminal diagnoses weren't included at all, and they just got whatever they got, in the system, and they tracked their mortality rates, over some period of time, and the folks who were prayed for did better, kind of statistically. And I have no materialistic explanation for this, you know, and other than that, the world is mysterious, and metta works, and intention works, and sending love out to the world actually has an effect, and prayer works. So it's a kind of magic. So just to really root us in this historical moment um, where there's still magic in the world, and it can still be part of our practice, and there is still magic in the Dharma, and can be embraced as part of our practice. When we do the chant that calls upon the forces of the woods around us, the dragons and the spirits of the rivers, um, it's mysterious to do that. You know, I was raised a, you know, rational American like lots of us, although I was Catholic, which is the most irrational of the great Christian faiths. Like, it's demons and angels all over the place in there. But so maybe some of that is still in here. But when we do that chant, you know, I do the practice of doing it as if it's absolutely real. And sometimes I can feel in my heart how real it is, and sometimes I can't. And I just do it because I trust the elders in this tradition who felt like that was an important enough thing to teach, to keep in, and that it wasn't an empty rite or ritual. It doesn't liberate, but that doesn't mean it's not meaningful or effective in moving energy in the world and keeping us connected to the forces greater than ourselves or other than ourselves that can support us in the world to be well. All right, so we'll pause there.